You wanted to know about my experience with the book version of The Princess Bride? As you wish. Sorry, I had to do it. It was an obligation. Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori and I'm so glad that you're here. Now, like many of you, I grew up with The Princess Bride as a major gateway part of my fantasy journey and loved it. I loved the film, I loved the characters, I have seen it so many times, and it's just such a quintessential, foundational fantasy adventure and love story. And I think everybody at this point at least knows the story to some degree. If you haven't, this isn't going to be a synopsis, but there are going to be some spoilers in here about the story overall. So if you're concerned about that, just be aware that I'm going to be talking about the story and how the book and the movie differ. Now, if you're looking for a should I read the book, should I watch the film, to me, that kind of comes down to what kind of an experience you're looking for, because they are quite different. In my opinion, the movie really captures the kind of grand, high fantasy adventure and that romantic subplot with a great deal of whimsy. It's a very wholesome, nostalgic feel to the film. Now, am I biased because I grew up watching it? Sure. However, I will say that if you're wondering, should I or should I not read the book version of The Princess Bride, just be aware that the book has a different tone than the film does. It's a little bit darker, it's a little bit more meta, and we'll get to that in a minute. And the characters are a bit different than they are in the film. Some of our favorite characters from the film did have similar-esque vibes in the story, but some of them were pretty drastically changed, in my opinion. And again, once I get into this, we'll talk more about that. But if you're just here going, should I or should I not? I don't know that that was much help, but that's my official opinion. So let's first talk about the story of The Princess Bride in book form. So William Goldman wrote this book, and he kind of portrays it as a existing classic from another place, another language, Florinese, that he has now translated and made into this officially compiled novel. And throughout the book, even very early on, he interjects through the story of Buttercup and Wesley and all of our other favorite characters, his opinions on S.A. Morgenstern, who is the original author. Now, for those of you that may not know this, S.A. Morgenstern does not exist. There was no original author for this story. William Goldman is the original author. However, he decided to be super big brain about it and create a fictional person, S.A. Morgenstern, who's the original teller of this classic tale, and proceed then throughout the book to critique Morgenstern's writing style, writing choices, character choices, and explain why he omitted certain things and why Morgenstern was a bit conceited here or whatever it might be. And so that's actually a fairly big part of the story, as we are also then reading about the classic fairy tale of Wesley, Buttercup, Inigo, Fezzik, and everyone else. In my opinion, having both watched the film and now read the book, the humor and whimsy of Princess Bride as a story doesn't translate on page as well as it does on film. And this is one of those cases where the same story told in different mediums can have very different outcomes, can have very different tones. You know, some people might like the book better, some people might like the movie better, and I really think it depends on the tone of the story that they enjoy most. Let's talk about the very beginning and how we immediately diverge between the book and the film, because the tone set at the very first chapter of The Princess Bride versus the first few minutes of the film is quite different. In the movie, we meet Buttercup and Wesley, and she lives on a farm with her parents, and Wesley is the stable boy, right? He helps out around the farm, takes care of the animals and odd jobs here and there. And she's pretty, shall we say, rude? Yeah, I think that's fair. She's kind of rude to him. And of course, it's all in the spirit of that she's trying to convince herself that she's not actually in love with him. And eventually, love wins out, and she admits that, sort of, She sort of admits that she's in love with him and finds out that he has in fact also been in love with her the whole time. It's very heartwarming, right? And it just shows that if you're rude to somebody, they'll inevitably fall in love with you. I've never particularly loved the romance between Buttercup and Wesley because, like we have established before on this channel, I am a bit of a curmudgeon when it comes to that. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of young love and I think it can be done really beautifully. And I do appreciate in the film, I think that they handled it better. Exhibit B. So in the book, we start off strong with the Count Rugen, who, you know, in the film and the book is Prince Humperdinck's right-hand man, and he hears through the grapevine in the book that there's this beautiful young woman out in the village. Now at this point, Buttercup is a bit of a tomboy. She likes going for a good horse ride. She's not really interested in boys. She's kind of a bit of a feral child, according to the rest of the village. And a random guy is driving along in his carriage through the village and sees Buttercup and goes, wow, there's some potential there. She's beautiful, or something of that nature, and goes and tells Count Rugen. Now, we never really get a pure explanation of why this person goes to tell Count Rugen or why Count Rugen has people telling him about beautiful young girls in villages, but I'll leave that one to your imagination. Anyways, Count Rugen in the book is married to the Countess. She's a bit vain, she's a fashionista, and it's pretty apparent early on that their marriage may be one of more convenience than love. But Count Rugen and his wife show up at Buttercup's parents' farm under the pretense of finding more out about their cows. Okay, now at this time, Count Rugen gets out of the carriage and he cannot stop staring at Buttercup really creepily, and his wife can't stop staring at Wesley. Oh, please show me more about the barn, Wesley. Please show me more about how you treat the animals, Wesley. And it's just creepy. So you have these two like middle-aged adults ogling these 17-year-olds on this farm, and to be honest, nothing really comes of that other than the fact that Count Rugen is aware of Buttercup later on to mention her to Prince Humperdinck so that he can marry a common farm girl. But to me, I'm really not sure why we needed to start with that. It was really weird, you guys, and it just sort of set an off tone so that by the time we start moving into Buttercup and Wesley's young love and romantic part of the story, I just had this like bitter aftertaste from everything that had happened in the beginning with the Count and Countess. And it kind of cast sort of a sickly pallor, if you will, over the young love story that happened afterwards. Hey guys, it's Editing Tori. So I just wanted to come on here and add a little bit about how the story is set up in the beginning of the book versus the beginning of the film. Because in the film, as many of you probably already know, we open with a sick young boy who is staying home from school, and his grandfather comes over to read him a story, and there's this really beautiful, wholesome kind of bit of banter between them, and it's this beautiful generational thing where the grandfather is sharing a story with him that he really loves. In the book, that whole bit is mentioned as kind of like a William Goldman experience in the little asides that he does throughout the book, but it's really a small mention compared to how big of a framework it is in the actual film. So again, you know, you have that difference in this kind of wholesome grandfather-grandson storytelling moment in the film that in the book just isn't, it's not there. It's not a framework. It doesn't start the book. It doesn't close us out. It's just kind of mentioned in the middle somewhere in some of Goldman's meta asides. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that as well because that also very much changes the styling of the story, but also the tone of how it begins and ends. Anyways, so like that's the beginning of the story, whereas in the film, we just have Buttercup and Wesley, and Count Rugen isn't even introduced at this point. Now, to be fair, in the movie, we don't really get any idea of how on earth Prince Humperdinck found out about Buttercup, so I can see where this gives us some sort of an explanation, but I don't know that it needed to be that. So the whole part with Buttercup and Wesley, in the film, like I said before, she's a bit rude to him, and then it kind of turns into this more loving banter before they finally admit their feelings for each other. In the book, the rudeness gets dialed up. And she's just mean. Like, she's mean to Wesley. And then she has this crazy monologue about when she finally realizes that she loves him, which the reason, you guys, that she figured out, okay? The reason that she figured out that she actually liked Wesley and the wool got pulled away from her eyes is after the Countess comes and ogles at him for a while in the barnyard. Buttercup realizes that, yes, you guessed it, she's jealous of this middle-aged woman ogling Wesley. And she can't handle the idea of Wesley and the Countess, which, to be honest, I can't either, so I don't blame her at all. And she gives us this very silly, satirical monologue of a young woman who's fallen so much in love that the mountains are quaking and the seas are parting and all of, you know how it goes. It's silly, right? And it's meant to be silly. However, I feel like the movie captured the whimsical silliness of young love in a much better way than the book does. It was just awkward in the book, largely, again, for me, due to how it happened and the influence of the Count and Countess on this whole situation. It was just weird. That's just the beginning, you guys. Like, that's just the beginning. I have so many thoughts on this book. Okay, we're gonna move on because obviously we all know that Wesley goes off to make his fortune so that he can actually afford to be Buttercup's husband, leaves her alone, and while he is gone, he supposedly dies at sea. And it's all very sad, and Buttercup is despondent and brokenhearted and swears that she will never love again. Now, throughout the story, the interjections that William Goldman makes about the fictional author S.A. Morgenstern were constantly pulling me out of the story because we're going back and forth from this high fantasy kind of alternate history, romance, adventure fantasy to William Goldman talking about writing style of an author who doesn't exist. There are some people that are really going to enjoy that. My husband's having a great time with it. He loves it. And again, he's listening to the audiobook, so it is quite possible that listening to the audiobook would be a better experience for that, to have, the change in voice inflection and what have you. I personally absolutely hated reading it physically. It was not my favorite. Once we get to the part of the story where Inigo and Fezzik and Vizzini show up and kidnap the princess, then Princess Buttercup. Now I was interested because from the movie, these are my favorite characters, right? I love Inigo and Fezzik. Who doesn't? If you don't love Inigo and Fezzik, I hate to say this, but there might not be any hope for you. So Fezzik is delightful in the book, to be honest. He has that same warm simplicity that Andre the Giant so beautifully gave him in the film, and he's just delightful and I love him so much, and he always tries his best and he always cares about the people around him even when he can't quite figure out what's going on, and I love him so deeply for that. Inigo is also a character that I deeply love in this story, and the two of them and their bromance that goes on through this story just makes me all sorts of happy. One of the things that the book did have that I appreciated over the film is that it gave more time to Fezzik and Inigo's backstories. We hear the story. We actually get to watch the story of Inigo's father being murdered by this horrible six-fingered man for no reason. We get to see the backstory of Fezzik. In the film, we're told about Inigo's father's death and how it happened, but we don't actually see it. We get nothing of Fezzik, other than Vizzini picking him up and telling him what to do so that he wasn't confused and alone. But we don't get anything about his backstory beyond that. And in the book, we get this beautiful little side quest, if you will, about Fezzik's childhood and his parents and how he's been bullied his whole life and how he was kind of forced to become a brute. And it's just really heartbreaking, and I really appreciated that part of this story, both for Inigo and Fezzik, because both of those, I think, added a lot of depth and understanding to their characters that wasn't there in the film. So that is something that I will give the book version over the film. Once we get into the part with the princess's kidnapping, then we start to see a lot of the very familiar lines from the film come back into play. And things started to feel a little bit more familiar. I settled into the story a little bit more. And the plot line very closely follows what happens in the film. Let's come back to Buttercup briefly, shall we? In the film, she wasn't my favorite in terms of character development. However, I will say that I liked her better than I did in the book. In the book, she almost comes across a lot more, dare I say, shallow and insipid. Maybe that's too harsh. But I think in the film, she doesn't come across that way as much. The Buttercup of this book really, really did not land with me very well. I had a really hard time with her character and even her relationship to Wesley. I feel like it didn't have the same sweetness and depth that the film brought to it. And of course, the actors in the film version did such a phenomenal job with their characters all across the board, not just Wesley and Buttercup. One of the main themes in this story that I do think Wesley and Buttercup draw attention to, that I appreciate, is the idea of, Goldman really accentuates the infatuation phase of young love and how over the top and silly it can be. And then he puts them through all of these trials. He puts their love through these fires where Buttercup thinks that he dies, and then he's back with her only to be snatched away, and she's at the mercy of this very powerful man who, in her defense, she doesn't seem to fear at any point, which is definitely a point in Buttercup's direction. I think that she is maintaining her agency and strength to a degree in the story, where a lot of other classic fantasy adventures would have let that fall into a more damsel in distress sort of category. I do think both the book and the film make her strong enough to hold her ground, to say, no, I'm not in love with you. I'm only gonna love my Wesley, and he will come for me, and I've never doubted him, and I don't want to get married to you. She never mixed words about what she did and did not want, and I can get behind that. Way to go, girl. Prince Humperdinck is way more creepy in the book than he is in the film. The way he's described. Let me read you a little line in how Prince Humperdinck is introduced in this book, because it's creepy. Like, Goldman did a fantastic job making Humperdinck just sinister in a way that I think to a depth that wasn't necessarily reached in the film. Hunting was his love. He made it a practice never to let a day go by without killing something. It didn't matter what. When he first grew dedicated, he killed only big things, elephants or pythons. But then, as his skills increased, he began to enjoy the suffering of little beasts too. Great guy, really great guy, what a catch. So Humperdinck definitely feels more sinister in the book than he did in the film, which didn't necessarily bother me, but like the whole zoo of death with all of these animals that he has caged and just waiting to be let out to be killed is really, it's definitely darker. I think one of the biggest things that makes this story darker than the film is actually Prince Humperdinck. Count Rugen is kind of sort of samesies in both, but Humperdinck is definitely darker in the book. All of our favorite moments of this story are featured within the book. You have the duel between Inigo and Wesley on the top of the Cliffs of Insanity. You have, the trio of tests that Wesley has to go through to defeat Inigo, Fezzik, and Vizzini. You have the fire swamp moment. There's so much that corresponds with the story that's told in the film. In my opinion, at the end of the day, Goldman's screenplay of the movie took all of the best parts of this story, minus the backstories of Inigo and Fezzik, which could have been, you know, delved into a little further, but there were time constraints, I understand, and made it the best version of itself. The high adventure whimsy and nostalgia and beauty and just warmth of the story, I think, is better portrayed in the film than it is here in the book. And I really feel, and this might just be me, and I understand that there are going to be people that have a very different opinion to me on this, the kind of meta approach to faking an original author and Goldman critiquing his choices in writing throughout, interspersed throughout the actual story, really did not add anything, and in fact really detracted from my enjoyment of the story as a whole. So I really could have done without all of that. But I have now read The Princess Bride by William Goldman, which is one of those fantasy classics that I feel like I had very high on my bucket list to read because the movie has always been such a major point of nostalgia for me. I do think I went into this book with an open mind. I don't feel like I went into the book expecting to like the movie better, that I was just dismissing the book because it wasn't the movie. I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing different art mediums with storytelling. I am pretty good at appreciating each of them for what they can bring to a story differently. And I think if I had never seen the film, I would have the same opinions about this book that I'm sharing with you right now. So I would love to know, down in the comments below, please let me know if you've experienced the book and or the movie and what your thoughts on it were and which one you liked better. If there's any other things, aspects of the film or the book that you want to mention down in the comments, please feel free, because I love hearing about you guys' experiences after I talk about mine. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for all the support to me and the channel. There are all of the links down below in the description box. And don't forget to leave a comment and a like and subscribe if you enjoy my content. Thank you for watching. Have a fantastic week. Read some 5-star books, and I'll see you in the next video.